Hey, welcome to the internet. Don't know if you've ever heard of it, but we've been hanging out here a while. My name is Rick, and this is a live stream, a broadcast, if you will. I'm here, I'm with TuneTrack. I think you already know all that. My beard's with me. I think you know that too. And today, I'm drinking a latte because I'm so fancy. Now you know that too. Listen, before we get started with our amazing interview, we want to just kind of give you a heads up. Obviously, today we're going to be talking with producer and music legend extraordinaire, Hugh Padgham. If you don't know who Hugh is, just leave now so that you're not embarrassed later. We'll give you a second to just go. If you do know, then you're excited because this is going to be amazing. His impact on popular music cannot be understated or overstated. So, a couple things. Number one, last week we released a product designed and featuring Hugh Padgham called the Hitmaker SDX. It's an expansion library for Superior 3, our flagship drum program. If you're not familiar with any of the words that just came out of my face, go to www.tunetrack.com and it'll tell you everything you need to know. I don't have time to do it for you today. Number two, we're doing this interview with Hugh digitally through the magic of satellites and Ethernets and Wampernets and LANs and WANs and all the other things that happen. So because we're at the mercy of the internet, things could happen. If there's a dropout, an audio glitch, don't get your panties in a bunch. We'll get it sorted out and we'll get right back to going on topic. Now, finally, for those of you watching this live, thank you for being here. We appreciate you. You're the best. For those of you watching this after the fact, because we've posted the video and you just wanted to see what was going on and we're too lazy to tune in to watch us live, you're dead to me. Don't ever come back here again. I'm just not interested in being your friend anymore. That's how I feel about it, for reals. All right, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, all the way from Greece, I present to you my friend, your hero, Mr. Hugh Padgham. Dun, dun, dun. Hugh, can you hear us?
Hello, everybody.
See, we're live on the internet. It's like he's here in a room next to me, but on a camera somehow. Simple.
What an introduction. Pleasure to be with you here today.
Well, thank you, sir, for taking the time. Now, you're in Greece right now, correct?
Yeah, you can see I'm sort of quite red and hot and everything. It's still very hot here in Greece, unlike Chicago, I think, and London as well. But anyway, I'm out on vacation here.
I love it. Well, thank you for taking the time for all of us today and for letting me ask you questions that will inevitably either frustrate or aggravate you beyond belief, because that's my job today. I'm going to jump right in, Hugh. So one of the things that I think is interesting about your career is that you have played all of the roles. You've been the engineer, the producer, the assistant engineer. You've kind of, in that control room, worn all the hats, and sometimes all at the same time. So I have to ask, out of all the roles, is there one you like better than the others?
Well, I certainly didn't like being an assistant engineer because you were treated like dirt. Yeah. When I started in 1974, I think it was, which is a pretty long time ago now, the assistant engineer was more or less sort of like a T-boy come sort of lackey, and it's incredible to see how much the hierarchy and the whole business has changed now. 50 years later, almost 50 years later. It's incredible to say that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Feels like yesterday to me. I can remember being sort of castigated by my boss or the other engineers. I mean, I used to have to, when I started in my first job, which was at a studio called Advision, the tape recorders were in a different room to the actual console. In fact, if you imagine you're sitting at a console and then you've got the big speakers, because we didn't even have little speakers in those days, really, apart from maybe Oratones, big speakers, then a big hole in the wall, and then inside the hole in the wall were all the tape recorders, and that's where I was. So, there was no communication other than the engineer shouting at you. None of the tape recorders had tape counters on them. So you had to work out where, if he says go back to the beginning of the song that you were working on, you had to know where the beginning of the song was by putting a Chinograph pencil mark on the front of it. I mean, it beggars belief to now not even know where the front or the end of the song was, let alone middle of the song. If they said, go to the first chorus, how did you know where the first chorus was? You know, it was crazy.
Unbelievable. So, okay,
Yeah.
so assistant engineer is the least, but if you had to choose as to whether to mix a record or be the engineer, even track the record or produce the record, would you pick one over the other, or do you like doing both equally?
Well, first of all, let me finish off by saying that the assistant engineer work when I first started was really scary. I mean, it was literally, you know, you were frightened to, it was not fun. You were frightened to go into work. You're thinking like, oh, I managed to get a job in the studio at last. And then you're frightened to death. Thank God in the late 70s, early 80s, tape recorders started having tape counters on and stuff like that, so you could know where you were on the tape. But I mean, when I started working, my first of all, it was the best thing in the world to get a job in a studio, because even though there were lots more studios then than there are now, everybody wanted to get to have a job in a studio. So to get a job was amazing. I mean, my aspiration really was to become chief engineer in a recording studio. I had no thoughts of being a producer really at that time. Or producers and engineers were very separate jobs, and so really it was my luck that I ended up joining Virgin Records, who were very sort of liberal and open in the late 70s, but were still making very good recording studios. That was my real lucky break. I mean, I worked at two different studios that were very good at sorry, that's my manager dinging me on my iWatch saying, I'm listening to you.
Tell Joe we said hello.
Yeah. Hey, Joe. Hello. You're the best. But I have to put you on mute now. However I do that. I'm not quite sure. Here we go. Anyway, so it was really the best break of my life was 1978, when I was still pretty young, and I got a job at Virgin Record Studio. They already had a studio called the Manor near Oxford, which was famous for recording Tubular Bells from Mike Oldfield, which was their first really massive big record.
Wow.
And they then decided to make a studio in London, which was called the Townhouse. And because I knew what was going on through, I won't go into it now, but I knew some of the guys from Virgin. So I managed to eke my way into a job there as a sort of, I suppose, junior engineer. I mean, there were two studios there when we started and probably 6 or 7 staff or something. So I was like the junior engineer, and it just happened to sort of blow up into being the most, the studio that everybody wanted to work in. And the great thing was, though, that even though Virgin was decidedly a sort of liberal company and Richard Branson was the boss, and he had long hair and all this sort of thing, in terms of studio ethics, if you want to use such a word, they were very, very good. The staff at the top and the maintenance people were very into high quality, and so it wasn't run as a sort of hippie thing at all. It was very, well run, and had technology and the latest technology very much at the forefront. So we had incredible equipment, but it was very well put together.
So speaking of technology, so you have this career, you have this amazing career that takes off in the late 70s and keeps going, and it's still going today. Do you remember the first record project, first whatever you did, where you were using a digital audio workstation? And what that was like, coming again from being in a room sequestered with just tape, sitting there waiting for an engineer to talk to you through the wall, to now you have this whole Star Trek ship in front of you. Do you remember that moment in your life?
Well, I mean, that was literally a couple of decades later.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're talking about using a digital workstation,
yeah,
the first completely digitally recorded record I did was an album I did with Frida from ABBA in 1980. Oh God, I'm so bad with years. I think it was 81 or 82 with Phil Collins. So no, I think it was 83 because she loved Face Value. And we went to Polar Studios, which was owned by ABBA in Sweden, in Stockholm in Sweden. And they had one of the first 32-track early days of digital. It sounded very brittle. And I certainly went back to making records on analog equipment for years after that, although we were mixing down to digital. Sony and JVC had a system which was quite interesting because the Synchronicity, the album I did with the Police, the last album, we recorded that in Montserrat in the Caribbean, and that was done on 24-track analog, but we mixed it to this super new JVC digital format, which was basically a big box plugged into a 3/4-inch U-matic video recorder. So the actual data was recorded onto a video recorder still using tape. And many years later, when we came to do some remastering on the Police stuff, it was a bit like VHS versus Betamax. It was Sony versus JVC, and the JVC had lost, and we couldn't find a machine to play back the original JVC 3/4-inch U-matic tapes. But anyway, that's pretty boring stuff. But anyway, I was always into the latest technology, whether it was synthesizers, drum machines. I mean, even when we did Face Value with Phil Collins and In the Air Tonight, that drum machine, which was a Roland drum machine, was more or less brand new then. And so anything that was new, we were into. Synclavier digital, the very original Fairlight, the original samplers, which when you look at the specs of them now, just look absolutely pathetic,
Well, and it's funny. So, I mean, obviously, you and I have discussed this ad nauseum, right? So at some point in time in every interview, someone's going to ask you about In the Air Tonight. So let's put that to the side, because I think what I'm more interested in, and I think what everyone else would be more interested in hearing is, so this, you do this Face Value record. In the Air Tonight is it's its own world, it's its own universe. But that clearly, from the listener standpoint, if you look at your discography moving forward from Face Value, that didn't really affect your sort of transparent production style and letting the artist really develop their sound and you kind of honing it in. The Police, none of the other records, even none of the other Phil Collins records have that Tom sound or that In the Air Tonight sound. You just kept moving forward. Was that hard for you to do in light of how popular that sound became?
Well, not really. I mean, I always just look at, I hear the song and I discuss with the artist or the band or whoever it is, what is their vision of a song, and I try and realize their vision. I'm not trying to put my vision into their song, if you know what I mean. I mean, obviously, In the Air Tonight and that drum thing kind of put me on the map in a way, which was great. You know, I mean, I'm not, but you couldn't have that sound on every single song. I mean, you call me sort of transparent. I always used to use the analogy of being a chameleon. So I kind of try and change my colors to what I think is the colors that the band see their art going, because all I'm there to do is to make their art. I'm not there I'm there to facilitate their art. I'm not trying to be an egotist myself. And I mean, there are other producers who I really respect. I mean, a friend of mine, Trevor Horn, who I've known for years, we sort of grew up musically in the same sort of era, and I worked with Trevor. He had a much more sort of distinctive style that his name almost became more important than the act, and I always felt that I preferred to be the other way around.
Well, and again, it's served you well. I think one of the things when we look at your discography and we look at all of the amazing work you've done is one of the reoccurring themes is you continue to work with a lot of the same artists through different stages of their career, and all of their work sounds different even as you're progressing through their career, to your point about how you are clearly just listening to the artist to find out what they want to do and where they want to go. But here's a track no one ever asks you about in any press or interviews, and I'm going to ask you just because it's funny. You actually worked on Spandau Ballet, their record with their big hit True, which is become a meme of its own. And I have to ask you, you've worked with Spandau Ballet extensively even before that and after. How that seems like such a very specific point in time in the 80s, a Human League, Spandau Ballet. Here's this guy doing Genesis, and he did a Yes record, and he's working with the Police. But then you get these real super poppy bands. How does that come about? What is that transition like for you?
Well, if I'm really, really honest, I was working at the Townhouse for Virgin, as we described in 1980, I suppose it would have been 79 or 80. And I was employed by Virgin and paid by Virgin as a staff engineer. And I just got put, Spandau Ballet booked into, it was actually the Manor Studios, their country studio. And I was put on the session. I'm not sure if they asked for me or not, but I was just put on their session. And that's how I worked with them.
It's amazing though.
Yeah. No, it was good. And funnily enough, I still speak to Gary Kemp quite often, because we've stayed quite good friends. And I don't know if you know his podcast called The Raconteurs.
Yeah.
With what's his name from not what's his name, but my other lovely friend from the Pink Floyd, who so we talk about that sometimes, but I didn't mix it, because whenever I hear True, I always have this horrendous thing about the digital bass drum sample that is so loud that it's like embarrassing.
I love it.
Just before I forget, my other great friend Guy Pratt. Sorry, I'm always like, so Guy Pratt and Gary Kemp have this podcast called The Raconteurs, which everybody listening to should listen to, because you
heard him. Listen to it. Everyone, check it out.
Everyone, they do a different interview every week, and it's usually pretty good fun and interesting, like just chatting like we're chatting now.
Yeah. So objectively, you look at your career through the 80s, which is generally where everyone tends to freeze you, but your career goes so much farther, which is amazing. But when you get to the 90s and you look back on the 80s, and you see maybe there's a shift in the landscape with music and grunge and all these things sort of becoming more global phenomena, do you have a moment where you think to yourself, okay, I had a good run, maybe I should stop? Or do you get excited and say, well, this could be new, let's see what happens?
Well, truth be told, I never really came up for air over the 80s and the 90s. You know, I just got asked to do one thing after another, and then sometimes I was booked up, you know, like a year ahead, which
Wow.
was quite stressful because sometimes records don't go tickety boo as you would like them to, and it would be like, oh my god, I meant to be starting with X in a couple of weeks, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be finished with Y, you know, in terms
Sure.
of mixing. Because the other thing with in the old days, when I call it the old days, I don't know, but when I got asked to make a record, and I think this goes for most people in those days, and I would say that I probably was one of the early guys who was like became engineer producer. Um, that you were expected to work on the record from the beginning to the end, and you did everything. I mean, Glyn Johns is an old friend of mine, and he's almost like a generation before me. He started in the early 60s rather than me starting in the early 70s, and that seems like a whole generation before, but he ended up being successfully producing as well. But when I eventually left working for Virgin to go freelance as engineer stroke producer, it was quite freaky. I was a bit worried about, you know, whether I was going to make a living out of it or not. And anyway, what I was getting at a minute ago was, in those days, you started a record, you recorded the backing tracks, you recorded the overdubs, you mixed it, and then you were mastering. So you were involved in that record from beginning to end. And I think nowadays the culture of records is quite different. I don't know so much about the kind of indie scene now, but I mean, I think we discussed the other day, when if you look at the credits list on Beyonce's new record, 15 producers on it or something. Yeah. on most tracks. So the industry has changed quite a lot, and I'm not sure how willing I would be to say to young kids now that have the same sort of career trajectory as I. I'm not so sure about the sort of indie band thing now. It's obviously the budgets are much and all that sort of thing.
Sure.
But I have a good friend called Nick Launay, who was a assistant with me actually on Face Value, and he's the king of sort of indie stuff, and he still is now, even though he's now probably in his 60s as well.
Wow. So you seem to have a really cool pension member out of the band that made their own sound that sounds nothing like the band they came from. And obviously the two most notable kind of stories here would be Phil Collins coming from Genesis, and then Sting coming from the Police. And their solo bodies of work really don't sound anything like the bands they left to go solo. Was that something that you had to think about, or was that, again, like you had mentioned earlier, part of their process of kind of branching out from where they came from?
No, I think it was their process, definitely. I mean, in terms of Phil, he had written songs that he didn't think would work with Genesis. I met Phil working with Peter Gabriel on his third solo album, which, you know, is the one, whatever they call it, Melt. But it was always just called Peter Gabriel 3 in England, and Phil was impressed with my work on that record, so he asked me to work on his record. And with Sting, I did the 2 last Police records, and I actually didn't do his first solo record, and he was the reason I didn't do his first solo record. He did ask me to, and I think he appreciated my I don't know, skills or whatever you call it in the studio. His manager at the time was famously cheap, and by the Sting doing his first solo album, I was actually doing all right in terms of my own career, and Sting's manager basically didn't want to pay me a penny, and so I say we, my manager and me, we said, okay, forget. And then by the time it was halfway through his second record, I think he realized, perhaps I do miss Hugh's skills, and asked me back. And that's when I then did a whole run of records with Sting. I'm very, very proud of those records.
Well, you've also been a mainstay of another one of my favorite bands, XTC, and have done a lot of work with them as well. I'm sure a lot of our watchers and listeners are intrigued about that as well. So can you just touch on your relationship? I mean, again, you span multiple albums with that band as well. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's pretty impressive.
Well, again, XTC are one of my favorite bands I work with. And again, I met them by luck, not by they were signed to Virgin Records, and I was the new guy at the new studio that they started up, the Townhouse, and it just happened. Wow. They booked in for a session with a producer called Steve Lillywhite, who you all know of as well, probably. We're pretty well exactly the same age, 1 month apart, and we struck up a friendship. But we met literally. It was this band XTC were booked in. They got a special rate because they were on Virgin Records. We made a record that was relatively successful. We then went on to make 2 more albums together with Steve, and then I made another one called English Settlement, where I was producing as well. So I mean, they're one of my literally favorite bands who should have made it bigger than they did. Yeah. And the other band I put in the same context and the same era as well was Split Enz, the Kiwi band. I think absolutely brilliant. And of course, Neil Finn, he was literally just out of short trousers when I first worked with them. He was 17 years old, and he then went on to form Crowded House and had a huge success with Crowded House. And they were 2 bands that I really, really rated and really, really enjoyed working with in sort of the early to mid 80s now. So
well, and in that same scene, a little later in the 80s, around the same time, a lot of people may not know, you also worked with someone who's become very popular in the zeitgeist again lately because of her song in Stranger Things 4, Kate Bush, who's kind of back to being on top of the world again, and you worked with her on a few records as well. What was that experience like?
A few cuts rather than a few records. And to be honest, I worked on the album called The Dreaming with her, and it was great, and she was good. And I met her through Peter Gabriel as well. I mean, the whole thing with the music business is meeting people through meeting people. And sometimes I think that nowadays, when everything is sort of done at home on a home setup, you don't have the camaraderie and the sort of, you know, the ability to sort of meet people like you used to. For instance, at the Townhouse in the 80s, there were 3 studios there, and there was a dining room, and everybody would go up and have lunch or dinner. And so you would meet the other people in the other studios who might be completely different acts from you. And it was really interesting. I first met Brian Ferry from Roxy Music. I met all sorts of people, and literally hundreds and hundreds of people. And nowadays, I think it's fantastic that home studios exist and Toon Track exists, because you can make the amazing here my advertising.
Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, I can't believe what I did with you guys in the studio, because when you listen to the demos and things that Norman and
Damien
and Damien have made, you can't believe that it's not real.
And that's funny, because I remember our first Zoom call together where you were being indoctrinated into what we did, and I said to you, imagine going in to make a major label record and setting the drums up and then never calling the rest of the band and letting them in. What would you do? And with that sort of, which is what we tell all of our producers, and they all kind of give me the same look like, well, I've heard that before. And then our guys show up and it's literally, if you can dream it, we can figure it out for you. So it's Norman and Damien, two members of our sound design team. We're just name dropping here on our call. Don't worry about it. You'll figure out. They're just amazing people. If you don't know them, you should. They're incredible. But the idea that for us as fans of your work, to let someone like you loose in a studio like British Grove and just give you the freedom and the challenge at the same time. Because certainly as a producer, you pick drum sounds, as you mentioned, based on the context of the song. What does the song need? So when there's no song to pick drum sounds for, it's it's liberating, but it's also probably horrifying. It's like, oh, is this going to work in anyone's music?
Story. I got a funny story in a second, but I will say that before I tell you this story, if you don't mind me telling
Please.
it, but back in the late 70s, 80s and stuff, you couldn't really make a record without going into a major studio. You couldn't really make a great record. I mean, there was very basic home recording stuff, but it really restricted bands, musicians, or whatever. They couldn't really get into a studio and make a major recording without a recording contract, and that was incredibly difficult to get, and studios were very expensive, and relatively speaking, I mean, the bands like XTC got sort of crucified by their recording contracts, but I mean, that's a different area which we won't go into now. So poor XTC never really made much money from their records for various reasons, but they still couldn't even have gone into the studio without having a contract with Virgin. And now you can buy your MacBook and start making records at home. You can now put them up on Spotify, whatever, I mean, it's so much easier and kind of better in a way that it's become much more liberalized. But anyway, that's we're sort of talking more politically here. But I had a funny story, because I actually worked with the Sex Pistols in the late 70s when I was a tape op still at my second studio that was called Lansdowne Studios. Anyway, a few years after that, I was working at Virgin, and Virgin had ended up signing the Sex Pistols, and then the Sex Pistols broke up and it became Public Image.
Right.
So Johnny Rotten had Public Image. They made a record, came out, and it was relatively successful in England. they were called PiL, Public Image Limited. And so they wanted to release the record in America, but the drummer had left the group. And so they didn't want to have to pay the drummer. I can't remember the whole sort of politics behind it, but anyway, Richard Branson rang me up and he decided we're going to re-record the Public Image record with a new drummer. And so it's like effectively a new record, which we will then release in America, and hopefully it'll be a huge hit. So we went up to the Manor Studios, which is the Virgin Studios in the country, and we were booked in for 2 weeks or something to remake the record. And in those days, there was the studio in an old barn, and the recording area for the band and the drum was quite dry. It was quite sort of, in the 70s, studios tended to be quite sort of well padded out and stuff. And so we had, over the years, we had got tie lines into a room in the main house, which was adjacent to the studio. We put tie lines in there, and there was like a billiards room, you know, like a snooker room. What do you call it in America?
Like a green room?
Yeah, you know, pool.
Oh, pool, yeah.
It was like a pool room.
I don't know your fancy English terms. Pool room.
Yeah, it had windows and wooden floor and wooden walls and stuff. And so it was a much liver sound. So, but it was a big room, so you could put the drums in there and put the mics up and record it and get a much liver sound, which was beginning to become a bit more trendy, hence, you know, In the Air Tonight and all that sort of thing. So anyway, we get to the studio and I'm trying to talk to Johnny Rotten, and I say, okay, so what sort of drum sound shall we have on this? Shall we have a live drum sound or a dead, you know, a more dead drum sound? And he said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, I think it would be really good to have a live drum sound on this song. So he then said, okay, now we're going to put them in the dead room then. And so after about a day, it didn't take very long, I realized that whatever I said, he would say the opposite. So if I thought a song would be good with a live drum sound, I'd say, let's put the drums in the main dead room. And he'd go, no, put them in the live room. So I got my own way, and we did the whole record like that.
You know, and again, one of the things that we really enjoyed as we talk about just these different drum sounds with this product was when we didn't press you. I mean, it was actually your recommendation to try and capture some of those electronic drum sounds that you had worked with from those machines back in the day, the way that you worked with them. And you had mentioned this, and we did a little video, obviously, of the making of the product, and you had mentioned how it was commonplace to take the machine and run it through a sound system in the recording room and mic that system to get the sound of the room and the vibe. And was that, I mean, I'm sure it's been a while since you've done that before working with us again and capturing the samples. Was it as fun a process as you remember? Was it as worth it as you remember?
Well, I think so. I think we were just always trying to muck around and come up with new ideas and things. And sometimes there were always new drum machines coming out at the time, and they were fun. And sometimes we just thought, well, they sound a bit sort of dull, just direct injected straight into the desk. Let's just give them a bit of life or whatever. So sometimes we'd put them out into the room completely. Sometimes we'd mix a bit of room in with the direct the DI sound as well. It was just mucking about, really. That's what it was all about. Just sort of why the dog lick its ghoulies, as they say, and the answer is because it can.
It's fantastic. Well, I mean, again, as we just we look at this objectively, and now that we're at 33,000 feet, right? When we started this process, I should remind everyone out there watching that, Tune Track products take quite a little bit of time to record because of the process we use. And Hugh can speak to the labor-intensive process of just going in with our sound guys and the way we capture things for the software. But what a lot of people don't know, and we'll just touch on it briefly because I think it's worth mentioning, is that Hugh and a couple of members of our sound design team were brave enough to actually try and do this and accomplish it. They did actually during the middle of the pandemic. We had looked at scheduling things, and there was really no way around working through what was a really, really strange time in human history. We didn't know when it was going to end. So again, under great, scrutiny and safety measures and precautions and everything we could do, a couple of members of our sound design team and Hugh went into British Grove Studios to make this product. And Hugh, obviously, as we come out of the pandemic a little bit, we're on the other side of it to some extent. It's still something we're all dealing with. Any thoughts on how that affected the process? Any thoughts on things that may have been different, or just anything you want to add? That I think it's a fitting tribute to people we lost during that time to talk about some of at least the good things that came from the pandemic.
Well, I think it was just lovely to actually be able to go and do some work again, and with some human beings. We've got into a process where most studios were closed and nobody had seen each other for a long time. So it was, just a pleasure to literally be able to do something, anything. And what else was I going to say? I had something in my mind when you were talking about that, but it's gone out of it now.
Oh, that's okay. Just spit it out when it comes out. It'll come back later. It
will come. Oh, I know what I was going to say. The fact also that when these original records were made, such as the Police and Phil Collins and this, that, and the other, we did them on analog. They were done, and so we British Grove has got such an amazing array of equipment, from everything from highly modern, digital, back to
shout out to British Grove.
Shout out to British Grove. Back to consoles with tubes in them that were, that Sergeant Pepper's was made on. So we managed to record pretty well all the drums going through analog as well. So we've got the sort of tape sound, the natural tape sound, which I think was really important. And Damien, sorry, I'm thinking my words as we go through. Were actually very. They're the ones who did the really hard work of editing all this stuff and putting it together into the package that it has become. And both Damien and Norman saying how pleased they were that we had managed to do that. And on occasion where Norman's playing the drums so low, so because we've got such a dynamic range, that we were able to use we were still going through analog equipment, but able to use modern digital versions of noise reduction to take the tape hiss, which when you're tapping a drum very, very quietly on its own, you would have a lot more tape hiss than you would if you were just doing it just digitally. And so Damien, managed to get rid of that. So we've still got the analog sound, but using modern technology to get rid of the tape hiss as well. So I mean, it's just incredible, best of all worlds. And I think it's incredible what you guys have all done.
Oh, well, all we did was show up. You did the hard work. Let me ask you this question.
These guys did the hard work. I just stuck the microphones up and listened and stuff. I mean, my thing with working with bands and things is I didn't want to take hours and hours getting drum sounds or guitar sounds, or bands don't want to do that, generally speaking, in a studio. They want to get on and make music. So my thing was like talking to the band, working out what they wanted on the song, putting the drums or instruments in hopefully a place that was good, And I don't think I ever spent more than half an hour getting a drum sound. I mean, I hear stories of people spending days getting drum sounds and trying 40,000 different snare drums and, whatever. For me, I kind of actually when I started off in as a tape op in the studios, especially the second studio I worked at called Lansdowne, I had a very, very good mentor who taught me about microphone technique, told me to read books about microphone technique or recording techniques, because it can get as technical as you want it to be. And because I was always quite gadget orientated as well, I took in all that as well as my love of music. So I kind of understood what certain microphones do and what they don't do and all that sort of thing. So I would sort of work it out all in my head and try and spend as little time possible. If a drummer is sitting there wanting to play a song, he's desperate to play a new song that they've rehearsed with the band. He doesn't want to sit there for an hour going doink, doink, doink on a snare drum,
Yeah.
So that was always my sort of modus operandi, really, trying to just get things together as quick as possible. And then sometimes just literally flying by the seat of my pants, as they would say. And that happened quite a lot as well.
So as we wind this down, because the risk I run here is that I could talk to you forever. Let's end with this. Looking back on the process of working with TuneTrack, and was it what you thought it would be, or was it different in any way?
Well, it was much more, working with TuneTrack was much more detailed than I thought it would be. And I think that's what makes the product so good. I mean, I couldn't believe that Norman could sit there all day with different snare drums going doink, doink, doink.
Look, if you keep talking so kindly about Norman and Damien, we're going to have to give them raises, and then I'm going to get in trouble.
Okay, I won't.
So you're going to have to start talking bad about them.
But I wasn't ready to understand how much, I can't think of the word other than detail, that goes into making these packages. And that's what makes them the way they are. And that's why when they're well utilized by the user, which is, how they can sound. I mean, you listen to some of those demos, you cannot believe that they're being played from samples.
Yeah. We're a long way from the barn out in the field, I can tell you that. We've come a long way. It's a good thing. It's a really good thing. Well, listen, Hugh, I've got to tell you, on behalf of TuneTrack, and I'm gonna say it for our users too, because if you're watching, you want me to say this to him. So, on behalf of everyone, we just wanted to thank you. We're just humbled to be involved in this process with you. We're humbled that you took some time out to record drums with us, and even taking time out while you're on vacation today. I mean, humbling is the only word I can think of. This is the English language sometimes isn't that good, but the words that exist generally tend to do okay. So I'm humbled by the fact that you've had this time and this experience with us, and we're very, very grateful. So thank you very much for everything.
Well, I have to say, I'm so happy to have worked with you on this stuff, and I'm also humbled to see my name on this packaging and everything that you've put together with it, because the whole packaging and everything is so uniquely done and so detailed. It's incredible. And like I said a second ago, I'm a nerd. I'm a nerd when it comes to drums. I'm a nerd when it comes to any sort of musical instruments and stuff. I'm a nerd on everything. I'm a car nerd. I'm a aeroplane nerd. I just love, and so it just fits my thing completely. So I hope everybody has a good time mucking around with it.
They will. If they don't, it's their problem. It's certainly not if they can't make good music with these drums, that's on them. Just cut them loose and let them go. Listen, we're going to let you get back to your vacation. Go have dinner. Enjoy the rest of your evening. You're in Greece. It's already nighttime there. We hopefully will see you again soon. And from all of us here, we wish you and yours the best in the coming weeks, months, and years ahead. And we look forward to hearing more amazing music that you've had the opportunity to influence.
Well, thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure to be here tonight with you and everybody else who's listening. And hope you enjoy the project. The project, whatever you're working on, and the product. So it's been a pleasure.
Cheers, mate. We'll talk to you soon, Hugh. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Now I'm talking to you out there in the internet. Okay, you just did it. You sat through it. You watched it. We talked to Hugh Padgham. He couldn't be any more amazing. He couldn't have been more forthright and honest. And I mean, if you're just tuning in and you missed this, that's your fault. And I hope you don't get to see. I hope you've learned from your mistakes. I hope you show up on time next time, because what you missed was, no, I'm kidding. It's going to go live. Of course, we're going to make it live when we're done so you can watch the video, relax. But if you're a TuneTrack user, this is your cue. Go and check out the Hitmaker SDX. Actually, go to the product page at tunetrack.com. Like Hugh's been mentioning, listen to the demos, play around with some of the sounds. It's incredible. All our products are incredible, but this one is also incredible. If you're not a TuneTrack user and you just tuned in, I don't know how you can be here and not be a TuneTrack user, but we'd like you to be a TuneTrack user. So you should also go to tunetrack.com and look at whatever you want to. There's plenty of stuff there. It's amazing. Okay, it's Friday. You've got stuff to do. I've got places to go. I'm probably going to get another latte because they make me so fancy. No? You're not buying it? All right. Anyway, me and my beard are going to get off YouTube because you guys probably have other things to do, and so do we. Have a great rest of your day, a great weekend. Again, Rick, TuneTrack, www.tunetrack.com. Thank you for being here. From all of us, we appreciate you, and we look forward to seeing you guys soon. Fade out. Star fade. Fade out. There we go.